Hey there, today's episode is brought to you by Samaritan Ministries, a community of Christians who care for one another spiritually and financially when a medical need arises. It's biblical, affordable healthcare sharing. You can learn more at samaritanministries.org/The Forgotten Podcast.
Sharing the stories of the foster care community, this is The Forgotten Podcast.
Hey, it's Jamie Cabe. Welcome back to The Forgotten Podcast, where we are sharing the stories of the foster care community. With every episode, our goal is to learn from children, parents, and workers in foster care so that we can all grow in our awareness and be encouraged to support this community right where we live. In fact, if you are interested in being part of supporting the foster care community, starting next month, May 2023, applications to become a TFI Advocate are open. Now, this only happens twice a year, and there are only a few spots available. So if you want to encourage your local foster care agencies and help churches become more aware of foster care, then you should apply. It's completely free, and we are here to help you along the way. You can learn more and sign up to be notified when applications go live at tfiadvocate.org. Now, if you enjoy this podcast, be sure to leave a review, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Thank you for listening and engaging with us. Okay, it's time. Let's do it. All right, well, Tess, oh my goodness, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. It is an extra special treat always for me to have one of our TFI advocates because you are part of our family here at TFI in a really unique and special way. And I want to let our listeners know that Tess Dykstra has been an advocate in Cobb County, Georgia with us since November 2021. And actually, Tess, I don't know if even you know this, but you were in our very first cohort when we brought on advocates as a more of a group and trained you all together. And that was something that we had not been doing before you. And so that's cool. You're coached currently by Liz, and you are married to Alex. Together, you have one biological son and one son you adopted through foster care. So I just want to give our listeners a bit of a context, but we're really going to talk about the advocate role, your experience with TFI. And so let's go ahead and get started. But first, thank you. Thank you so much for being on with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's just start from the beginning. How did you first hear about TFI? And then we'll kind of dive into specifically the advocate role. Maybe one was before I don't know. I don't know how this all came to be. So tell us.
Sure. Yeah. So my husband and I were looking to become foster parents and starting the licensing process, just feeling a call from the Lord. It had to have been from him because we really didn't know many people that were foster parents or engaged in the foster community at all. So we started researching, and as part of that research, I started looking for resources and community, honestly, to see if honestly there were other people. It just felt like such a natural fit for the church to be the ones to answer the call for foster care. But I hadn't seen that despite being in church for my whole life. I didn't really see that exemplified. So I started looking for podcasts and just different resources to see if it was out there. So I stumbled upon the Forgotten Podcast when I was seeking out those resources. And at the time had about an hour commute to work. And so I ran through the episodes very quickly, just like one after the other on my commute to and from work, and just got really excited as part of our licensing journey to hear that there were other people that had the same heart. So that's how I initially heard about TFI and started listening to the podcast.
That is so cool. I love that. Tess, that is actually more and more common to hear of people finding us through the podcast. And I love that. So when you first found us through the podcast, we probably weren't talking necessarily about the advocate role that much, or when did that kind of become real to you? Like, oh my goodness, this is a way I can get involved in my community.
Yeah. So I think there was more of a campaign probably because you had mentioned that you were looking towards like the cohorts and bringing in groups of advocates. So I think that like the midpoint through the show, you started doing like a little promo for the advocate role. And so I kept hearing about it. And at the time we had a sibling set of 2, and it was during COVID, and there was a lot going on, and it just wasn't the right time. And I knew that it wasn't the right time. But I kept thinking about it, and our girls reunified. And then we had our biological son, and he was really little. So even for that period, it was like I just kept listening to the podcasts and kept hearing about the advocate role. And I think you guys were sharing different aspects and interviewing different advocates to kind of give us a flavor of what that could look like. And so during that period, we called it like our rest period, which is funny because we had a newborn, but we didn't have any foster placements. So it was a rest period. And so I was just kind of thinking about it at that point. And then we started doing respite care, but we weren't ready to jump back in with a full-time long-term placement yet. But I was feeling this call from the Lord to like still stay engaged. I was a little scared, to be honest, that I would get really comfortable with just one child and just doing short-term placements. And I wanted to make sure that we stayed soft towards the Lord and kept looking for ways to be stretched and kept looking for opportunities to serve and learn more and just be part of the foster care community. So that's when I initially, and it's funny, I had filled out the form once and I never submitted it. And then like a few months later, I was like, no, I need to just do it. And so I went ahead and filled it out. And that's when I started the interview process and was part of that first cohort. So that's kind of what launched us in.
That's so cool. Well, we're so happy that you did that and that you're on the team. So what was your experience like with us in those first days, the interview process, even the training? Talk through that. Was it what you expected? Was it different? How was your experience?
Sure. Yeah. I didn't know what to expect. I honestly was trying to understand the scale that TFI was on. Like I didn't know if it was just a few people or a lot of people, and just trying to gauge that at first. I was surprised. I'm in the Atlanta area, and I was really surprised when I looked at the map online that there was nobody in this area just because it's a bigger community. So I originally, I think, started working with Sarah, and she was my first point of contact just to kind of like hold my hand through the first little bit and kind of help me understand like that scale and the true purpose of what TFI exists to do, and what I would be entering into and what the expectations that I could have for you all were, but then also vice versa, that you could have for me. And honestly, I was equally intimidated and excited for how involved the interview process was. I was like, oh gosh, like this is a pretty, this is pretty intense, but I liked it too, because it was like, it's not for the faint of heart. It's someone that wants to truly be committed to serving your foster community. And that's evident even from the intentionality on the first forms that you fill out and saying like, here's my testimony. Here's how God has led me to this point. And if it's not the same vision that you all have, then it's not a good fit for either of us. So I think both of us were interviewing each other, and I was really encouraged by that. But like I said, a little bit like, oh gosh, this is intense. Am I going to be up to the standard that they're looking for? So it was good.
That's good. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It really is less about us interviewing you. It really is about us making sure we're clear, so that you know what you're getting into as best as you can, and us interviewing each other, making sure we're the right fit, because there are a ton of really wonderful organizations out there. And we certainly don't think we're the only or the best or, you know, just the one right way. We are one way to serve. And so we just want to make sure that those who join with us want that, are interested in that model, are focusing on that vision. So I love that. So then when you got in, and you started with this cohort, what was that experience like? Because now you're with a handful of other folks just like you who have gone through this application process, want to do this, brand new to this whole thing. How was that for you?
I loved the cohort aspect. They told us along the way that this was kind of new and that we were the guinea pigs, but it didn't feel like it. It was like, oh, this is always how it's been. So I really enjoyed that aspect because it gave each of us an idea of the different ways that advocacy can play out in individual areas. And especially at that first little bit where you're like launching and kicking off, I think it was really helpful to see that first, we have a lot in common. We're all in the same boat in terms of this is new, this is ambiguous, we don't know what you were doing yet, and we can kind of all just like hold hands and run, like get started into things. But then it was neat to see I think it pushed me harder than I would have to really like engage with the agency specifically, because we would get on like roundtables and talk, and I would get to hear updates on like somebody, oh, yay, we get to celebrate that win that you got a meeting with that agency worker. And it, in some ways, I'm sure it could seem like, oh, disappointing, like, oh, I haven't gotten that win. But it didn't feel like that at all. It was really good to just see like, we're all in different phases and this is all playing out in different ways, but the crux of it is the same. We all have the same goal of we want to see churches and agencies connect and us be the answer to the challenges that they have and feel the support that we have to offer. So I loved the aspect. And I had a call, I think, last week, and one of the girls from the first cohort was on there, and somebody was introducing us, and we were like, no, don't introduce us. We love each other. We already have connected. That. Yeah. So it was cool.
That's awesome. And you talked about wanting community. That was one of the reasons you started. That's something we're very intentional about, is helping our advocates have community with each other throughout the year virtually, but then you got to also experience retreat, which is just one of our absolute favorite things, where we're bringing you guys all come together. Everyone who can is coming together, and we're in person together. And it's beautiful, isn't it? It's like all these relationships we've made online come to life. And that connection is just, I am just always encouraged and amazed at how quickly, like, we never have to say, okay, everyone, like, talk. It's like, no, okay, we have to stop talking right now because we have to move on. You know, I just think that's beautiful. But what has been your experience with the community at large and retreat specifically? Yeah,
it has been one of the, I'd say the last 2 years, one of the most fundamental areas of community for me, because in normal life, I'm the oddball. Like, we don't have a lot of friends who foster. People don't really understand what it's like. They don't understand the ins and outs of the emotional investment and the time investment and just all the different aspects. And it's really odd, but in a great way, to be in a community that it's the norm. Like, we can throw around acronyms and everyone understands, or we can like get a text. Like, when our little guy's mom had TPR, I had several people text me an acronym. There's one right there.
Right. Termination of parental rights.
Yes. Right. Text me the day of and say, like, here's some scripture for the day, because they've been there and they've done it. So it was very, very cool to see, I think, and I'll get teary thinking about it, like a glimpse of heaven of like, that is the norm, is like people caring for other people and entering into those hard spaces versus feeling like isolated and like, I'm the only one doing this. And I feel like it's so worth it, but it's really hard when I'm alone. So it was very, very cool to get a different realm to feel like this is the norm versus the outlier.
Wow. I love that. And would you say it has impacted, sounds like it's clearly impacted you personally. How has the community impacted you as a ministry leader?
Yeah. I would say it's definitely stretched me in a lot of ways. But it's been one of the most encouraging things that I've done so far. I think that it's neat to see how God takes different personalities and different skill sets. And even though we talk about this even in like trainings, you'll have different, I think we took like an assessment to see the areas that we thrive in or need to be challenged in, or look for help in other people in those areas because we don't have it. So I think it's been cool to see within myself, like my strengths be highlighted, but then be able to recognize weaknesses and view them as an opportunity for the church to step in and round out all of those things. So it's been awesome to like just pray, like, Lord, I'm not very good in the area of, I've been talking to Liz about, like, I don't love social media. I don't like, I get too attached and too involved. And so I just have to stay away. And so we've been praying, like, Lord, send me someone for my team that can help me manage social media. So there are just lots of opportunities to trust God that he's going to send somebody to fill in the gaps that you don't have, but then also like celebrate the areas that he's given talents and gifts to be able to push a ministry forward.
I love that. And I deeply feel that as well on the national side of things. Like, God, yes, he put some things in me that helped start this. But my goodness, if he hadn't brought some of these people around me, we wouldn't be able to build. You know, we wouldn't be able to grow. Like the training, that is so Holly and the team, you know, who's put that together. Like that wouldn't have happened when I was bringing on advocates in the early days. I mean, I was like, do you love Jesus? And they, yes. And I'm like, come on in then.
Yeah.
You know, it's so beautiful to be able to just acknowledge your own weaknesses and realize that's not a bad thing. That's just human. We're limited. But I know for myself, even though I say this and know this, I can still get those lies from the enemy that you're not, that means you're not good enough, or you're not where you're supposed to be, or you're this and that. But that's just not true. That's just the beauty, like you said, of the church, the body of Christ.
Yeah.
You mentioned Liz, who is your coach, and every advocate is connected with a coach. What does coaching look like, and how has it looked for you, and what's been the impact of coaching for you?
Sure. So just background is that you kind of go through that initial phase of training, and it's a lot more intense. Like you're meeting with someone like every other week, I think is the cadence that we had. So it's like very much like they're holding both of your hands, and then they kind of like let go one of your hand, and like the cadence of even doing the roundtables with the other advocates that are in your cohort, it starts tapering off as you launch and as it becomes your baby versus somebody else coaching on how to do it. So coaches, I think, are a huge asset, because once they kind of let go completely, you still have your coach, and you still have that like pillar time that you can bounce ideas off of someone, or even like challenge. Like they will come and say like, hey, you said that you wanted to do this initiative. Have you followed through? Or are there any steps that you've taken towards that? And I think that it's really helpful, because there's a lot of grace for sure involved, but also it does push me a little bit more to like, okay, I told somebody else that I would do this because I want to, but they're going to hold me accountable to do that thing. And it changes. Like I think meet a little less than we used to, because my ministry has taken off more, and I don't need quite as much support, but I also know I can send her a text whenever and know that she's there available. So I think that a coach has been, just an indispensable part of the journey, and feeling connected, even with like, hey, we still want to make sure this aligns with TFI's heart. Like make sure like we have these check-ins that we're all still on the same page and pursuing the same goal. So I think that is a big helpful part of that.
When I remember earlier when we talked about community, how the community has been impactful to you personally and as a leader, would you say the same thing with the coach?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the coaches, speaking of gifts and the way that the Lord has equipped people, they're really good at what they do. And I think she actually might be like a therapist also. So that's probably why she's great at listening and being able to interpret emotions and all of that. And it's like, there are two big aspects of it. I think there's the goal and the ministry part of it, but they're very intentional about the personal too. And so Liz has adopted children, and she got to walk through an adoption with me. And so I would say the first quarter to half of every meeting was just her asking, like, how's he doing? How are things going? How can I support you in this? Praying for me. And that, even in and of itself, I don't think that was the primary goal of the relationship, but that need being met, I think, allows me to do more in my ministry because I feel like I've been filled up, and I feel that I'm connecting with someone else that understands and gets it and has done it a step ahead of me.
I love that. And I relate because I also have a coach, not through TFI, but I have a leadership coach, and I feel like she is exactly what Liz is for you. Like, she will help me strategize, talk through practical things, but then she cares so deeply for my heart. And I mean, I can sit there and I can just share. Sometimes the meetings are just personal because it's just a really hard time. And, we just find that so valuable. And, we say often, in fact, it's the coffee cup I'm drinking out of. Well cared for people. It's not showing whatever, but well cared for people care well for people. And that is something we really do care about. But I want to ask you, do you feel that all the way throughout? Because that's something we believe in. We want to be people who care for people, you guys, because we know that the better you're cared for, you're able to care for the people in your community. Are you seeing that lived out throughout the TFI organization?
Yeah. So the example I shared with Liz is more recent. We just adopted our son like 3 months ago. So it's a recent thing. But when I first started with that first cohort and we were doing more intense trainings, and I mean, that's the hardest part, is just getting it off the ground, making all those initial connections, conveying a clear message to get people on board. That's a hard part of it. And so that is the most time intensive part, I would say. And at the same time, my 3-year-old nephew got diagnosed with cancer. And so I was like, oh my gosh, Lord, what the heck? Like, you told me to like do this thing that's going to take up a lot of time. But also, like, I was managing a lot of his like GoFundMe's and updates. And it was just a lot, even from an emotional heaviness standpoint. And so I had this like guilt of like, I know they would never say like, oh, you're not hitting the right like threshold or whatever. But I felt that that's just how I am. I'm hard on myself in those ways. And I got a note in the mail from Sarah, and she had seen on Facebook that my nephew had been diagnosed with cancer. And she was just like encouraging me and just like sent me some like scripture cards of encouragement and truth, and just pouring into me. Like, I never told them that this was going on. She sought that out, and then not only like, acknowledged it, but then acted on it and sent me this package. And it was just like, I think I called her the next day and I just like cried. I was like, I thought that you guys were going to be disappointed in me because I haven't hit these goals in time. And instead, you cared for me well. And I thought I was the one that was supposed to be like generating an output. And instead, you came alongside me and held me up in a hard time. So that's from the beginning. And then now I have Liz, and we just walked through an adoption. And so I've just seen like the heart of TFI is so genuine. And like, that is true. Well cared for people care well for people. And I've seen evidence of that throughout my entire journey thus far.
That is incredible. I love that.
Hey, a quick word from our sponsor, Samaritan Ministries. God's love is steadfast and true. He cares for us, and He calls us to care for one another. And Samaritan Ministries connects hundreds of thousands of Christians across the nation who come together through prayer, encouragement, and financial support when a medical need arises. It's not insurance, and there are no networks, so you get to choose the healthcare providers and treatments that best meet your family's needs. Your medical bills are sent to Samaritan Ministries, and then they notify fellow members to pray for you and send money directly to you to help pay those bills. When the body of Christ comes together to pray, encourage, and provide for one another, burdens are lifted and God is glorified. This applies to all areas of life, including healthcare. You can learn more at samaritanministries.org/The Forgotten Podcast, and we want to say a very special thank you to Samaritan Ministries for sponsoring today's episode. Now, back to the show.
So, as you think about the things you've learned in this journey, this might be a challenging question, but you just tell me what you think. But what do you think makes a good advocate, or what qualities do you see in other advocates that are helpful in this role? Because as we share this, I'm thinking of those who are listening and who are going, okay, is this something that I want to do? So what would be some things to help them identify in themselves? Maybe this would be something that would be a fit for me.
Sure. Yeah. I like to give background. I work full time. I have 2 kids. I was afraid when I first started that I wanted to commit to it and I wanted to do it well. And I wasn't sure if I had the resources to do that. And so that was part of the trepidation. And I think the Lord just worked on that. And the more and that's part of the interview process is I was honestly saying what does this take? Do I have what I need to do this well? And I always tell people that are interested or thinking about it, I'm I don't have tons of extra time, which no one does. Everyone is busy,
Sure.
So I think that's one part of it is it does take commitment, but you can do it even if it is a busy season of life where you have, I'm sure most of the listeners here have a lot going on just in terms of even being foster parents or being already interested in this realm of life. And so I would say just the persistence piece has carried me well and carried other advocates well. There are going to be times that you don't hear back when you email an agency worker, and you have to be persistent and kind and loving, but be persistent to get, okay, maybe this avenue is not working. So let me reach out to this other person and see if they will meet with me or have interest in this. And then just being able to communicate the vision and the goal takes time, and it takes modeling it, I think, is the biggest part of it. People don't understand until they get to see it happen. So for me, I've had to be really persistent in inviting other people in my church into a staff appreciation event so that they can see it for themselves. And so persistence, I think, is a huge thing. I would say a lot of grace for yourself and the people you're working with, just to remember the heart of this. The heart of this is to be the hands and feet of Christ. The heart of this is to answer the call to use the resources that he has lavishly given us to love others. And the heart of it is our own sanctification and the process. And so I think that's another part of it is you have to be able to see the end goal, even in the hard days, of what's this work that we're actually doing. And it has eternal value. And so being able to hold on to that. And then there's all the little stuff of you have to be a good time manager. You have to I don't know, things like that. But it's not far-fetched things that you can't do. Anybody can do this, and each person's going to have a different style of the way that their ministry plays out. So hopefully that answered your question.
That's great. And every ministry is going to look a little different because the needs in every community, though similar, are different. Sometimes I know that it helps me because sometimes I can get a little caught in my own head in the strategies that we're doing. Which is awareness, encouragement, and advocacy. Those are our big, broad strategies of how we're helping people support the foster care community. But I can get a little bit so caught up in how we do things that I need to be reminded and remind our team of the why. And sometimes it's helpful. I remember even just not long ago, some of my team some of the leadership was going, okay, what is the problem? Let's just take it all the way back. What's the big problem we're trying to solve here? And the big problem we're trying to push back again to solve is the foster care community feels forgotten. Like too many men and women, too many workers, children, parents in foster care feel misunderstood. They feel unloved. They feel uncared for. Like we can't stand that, right? And God has a solution, and he has equipped the church to care for people. Doesn't necessarily mean we're going to bring children into our home, right? But he has equipped us to care, to help see people the way he sees them. And like you mentioned, it is a sanctifying process for ourselves, because that also means we need to see ourselves the way Christ sees us. And I know that nationally we're focused on these strategies of awareness and encouragement. Locally, you're focused on these of helping bring awareness to the church, bring encouragement to the foster care community. We know that this also happens locally and nationally through the help from generous partners, right? Ministry partners. One thing I love is that we get to every area locally. If you have someone who gives locally, that money stays local. None of that money comes back to the national side of things. But I just want to let's get real practical, on the ground, because that's what you guys are doing. You're multiplying this whole vision of helping people everywhere support the foster care community and experience Jesus together by bringing awareness and encouragement on the ground. What are some ways that has looked in your community? What is some of the impact of what you're doing?
Yeah. So I think a huge hurdle that, I have faced in my church and in this community is just awareness. I think that there are a lot of really amazing Christian people who want to be able to help. It's not in front of their face. And so they're just not aware. And so you talk to many people that just have misconceptions about foster care. And so even just having a ministry launch at the church and hearing more foster care, like my church has been amazing about letting me post things and go up front and talk and just different things to spark it. And even if they're not engaging in the activities that I'm doing, they're hearing about foster care, and it's making them think more about it and want, I think, a clearer picture of what it really is. And oh, that person's doing it. That seems much more attainable than the misconceptions that you hear of oh, these kids are just so scary, or oh, people just do it for the money, or whatever. When you see an alternative view, it's going to just bring more color to the truth. And so I think that's been a big part of it, is just the awareness. The way that we do that, the primary area that I have started just within our church is agency appreciation. So we have a fairly large agency. We have about 150 agency workers. And so the Lord connected me with one of the top people within the agency who happens to be a believer. And I've just had incredible favor with her. She just is, anytime I want to be in the agency, she's yep, doors open, come on in, whatever you want to do. And so that's looked like they had a lot of turnover during COVID. So after they started going back into the office and then doing home visits in the homes, they had a lot of people that started during COVID remote and then were not willing to transition to in-person and go into homes. So they started losing a lot of people. And so I just was able to sit down and talk with her, and I'm like, hey, what does it look like to make people want to stay? What does it look like to make them feel appreciated and supported to the point that they're not going to quit their job? Because we use the example all the time. We had kids during COVID. If we had the same agency worker the entire case, they would have gone home 4 months earlier, I would say. Wow. If they hadn't, we had 3 different caseworkers. I was briefing the next caseworker on their case. So if that's consistent, and you have one caseworker who feels loved and cared for, that has the more capacity to invest in their cases and their kids, these kids are going to go back faster, or they're going to be cared for more, or even the biological parents are being cared for so that they can get healthy and get their kids back. So I just said, like, what does that look like? What do we do? And so we actually got to partner with her. She already had started some initiatives for just retention. And so we got to start she would do like quarterly appreciation meals for her staff. And they were fun. They still are. We do them all the time. They're fun. We just like camp out in the parking lot. We do food trucks. We do bingo. They do karaoke. Like we just have fun and just like remind them like the day to day of your work is very hard and very somber in a lot of ways, but like you have community, you are connected. We care about the work that you're doing, and we want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. And so it's been just like super fun. I've gotten to know a lot of them. Like the first time I came, everyone was like, who's this girl? They thought I worked there. I don't work there. Like, why are you here if you don't work here? And now like I know people and I can sit down and like, hey, how's that thing going? Did that kid go home? Like just things that we have built relationship around. So so that's been the primary. And then there are little things sprinkled through of just like notes of appreciation or like just checking in with the deputy director, like, hey, how are you? How are things going? Like, I'm still here. What do you need? And she's just expressed that goes a long way. Just feeling like somebody's there to meet that need.
Yeah. It's so much. We as people need to know that we're not alone and need to know that we have dignity, worth, right? That people see us, because that's again the way Christ sees us. Right. I'm reading a book right now called Unbroken. It's about Louis Zamperini. I don't know if you're familiar with this story or not, but it's back in World War II, and he was downed aircraft, and I mean it's insane. He lived on a raft with 3 other guys in the middle of the ocean for like 40 days, sharks all around, and then when they were finally found, were imprisoned by Japanese. And I mean it was just unrelenting. And one of the things that he said, it was harder being in those prison camps because they took away their dignity. And that's when they really started to lose like their humanity, is because they took away their dignity. Where on the rafts, when sharks are encircling them, I mean, and they're starving and they're burning. I mean, that was incredibly, one guy actually died on the raft, but that was incredibly challenging and terrible. But it was when they lost their dignity and people treated them like objects. It just hits me again of why we do what we do. What matters is that we're showing people that they matter, because they do. We do. We matter to Christ. We matter to each other. We need each other. And I just think that is the most important thing we do.
Yeah. And that's what makes it sustainable to do the hard things that have value, is when you feel like you matter and what you're doing has value. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was walking down the other day, I think we were on a trip away, and I just walked down into the lobby of the hotel, and the lady said, "Hey." And I mean, she was farther away, and it was just like, it just kind of hit me like somebody saw me, and I know they do that intentionally. They care, but it means something. It means something. It's the whole well cared for people, care well for people. I mean, you've laid it out really well there. So one thing you've already mentioned, this work has not been easy, right? And what has been harder than expected in being a part of ministry to the foster care community?
I think just getting traction has been difficult. I think I've mentioned it before, but just trying to convey, first off, the people that I'm working with in church don't know much about the foster community to begin with. So then going a step further and saying like, hey, join me in serving these people that are part of the foster care community, just like filling in that picture for them of like giving it some, just like zeal for like, why are we doing this? Like, what does this work mean for, like, what's the actual result of us being able to care well for agency workers. And so I think that that's been difficult for sure, is just casting that vision and getting people involved when they have zero background. And they love the Lord. And that's the thing that I hone in on is like, okay, Lord, but we are united in the fact that like you say to care for the widows and orphans. And so they have a very clear calling just objectively as a Christian to do this work. Let me try to help them understand what it looks like to do that. So I think that's been difficult. I think there like it ebbs and flows with connectivity to the agency. I think sometimes they're super busy. And sometimes I'm super busy. And so it just kind of goes back and forth of like, you have to be intentional about being consistent, even when it ebbs and flows, and it's going to. And that's like a mark of the long-term relationship, I would say, is we're not, that's another challenge, is they think that you're there for a one and done. They think that you're going to do like a diaper drive, and then, cause that's how other people do engage with them. And that meets a need for sure. But to be able to like prove that we're in it for the long haul, I think has taken a little bit more time and consistency. And that's the only way you earn that, is to just be there consistently over time, do what you say you're going to do. And so I think we're getting there for sure. But it does, you have to earn trust. And so at the beginning, it's like, there's a wall up a little bit, and they're not as open to letting you in. And they're a little more guarded in what they tell you and what they let you be privy to. And now we're starting to like get in more. And we just had, I think Liz called it like a dream session, where I got on Zoom with a bunch of the staff and was just like, I have a notebook and a pen. What are your dreams for like what this agency could look like, or the areas that you need help? No, I will not be able to meet all of those needs, but like just dream it. And so then we can go from there. Like if it's something that you've spoken out, that's something that we can all work towards or pray about. Like, Lord, is this something that you'll meet this need? And so I think we would have never had the opportunity to have a session like that had we not built that relationship, and had they not seen, like, I think they would have felt like it was a waste of time. Like, oh, I'm just going to like dream, but they're not going to do anything about it. Whereas they're like, no, they've been consistently serving us and following through for over a year. And so I do feel like me voicing this may have some actual implications. So yeah, I think those have been some of the biggest challenges for sure.
That's really cool. And I know that a lot of times when I'm sharing with people, they'll ask, so how have they responded? If you're working with a state, how have they responded to when you talk about Jesus, or you talk about prayer, or you talk about that? How has that been for you?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on your area. I'm in the Bible Belt. I'm in Atlanta. Not to say that that is the status quo for everyone here by any means. I definitely have had an easier time introducing the gospel in these spaces than some of the advocates in say like northern areas. So I am glad that I have that perspective to see that this is not the norm. And like I said, like, I mean, the first event I ever did, I just sat with the deputy director as staff came and got their meals. We were together for like an hour. So we just chatted like the whole time. And I mean, it's hard not to tell the why of what you're doing. Like, it's going to come up, you know? And so she was like, hey, why are you doing this? And I was like, well, because I love Jesus and because I've seen this need and whatever. So we just like launched into this discussion. By the end of it, she sent me an email and she was like, hey, I didn't tell you this, but I used to be very, very close to the Lord, was in church all the time. Like, that was a big part of my life. And I have stepped away. That she had personal things that were difficult. And so she just said, like, I stepped away, but seeing the consistency and the care that you've had for us and just my staff, she's like, it's made me realize that I'm missing something and I want to be part of a community that's doing stuff like this. So it's just been like so natural and like praise God, like that's totally him. But for me, it's been easy. It's just been like, hey, we're with this church, with TFI. And I mean, if that's truly the heart of it, like it's an authentic discussion because that's why we're here, what we're doing, or doing what we're doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Tess, this has been incredible. I really appreciate the time you've given to us today to help our listeners. Will you just speak as we close out here? Speak to someone who's listening. Put yourself in you of a year and a half ago or whatever, when you first heard about this, when you're thinking about it. Just any advice, any encouragement to someone who's listening who this is pricking their heart and they're going, man, it connects with me in a way.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I would say to begin with, if the Lord is pricking your heart, then buckle up because he's probably going to make you do something uncomfortable, but it's going to be so worth it because that's exactly where I was at first. It was like, I heard it and I didn't think anything of it. And then all of a sudden I heard it and was like, oh, I think I need to do something with that. And that's how the Lord works. I feel like there's just a conviction there that he uses to drive his people into his work. And so I would say just be open. And I think cliche as it is, like pray about it. Like, Lord, does my community have this gap that needs to be filled? And can I be part of that solution? And I would encourage you not to act out of fear. I think that is just a huge leverage that the enemy uses to keep us from doing things that matter. And so I would say, like, I've seen the Lord, we didn't know we'd be adopting a son in the middle of all of this. And so I joke with people that God made it exceptionally smooth for me because I didn't know that I'd be adopting an extra kid in the middle of it, but he's faithful and he provided. And so I think that just knowing he's going to meet you if you are consistent and you are faithful to answer him and have a soft heart towards him, he's going to back you up and he's going to just fill those needs. So I would encourage you that, just be vulnerable and be willing to step out in faith and see him work, because where we end, he begins. And so you just get to see him really show up in amazing ways.
I love it. I love it. Well, Tess, thank you so much. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for being part of the team. And thanks for being on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is made possible by Team 310, a group of people from all across the country who give monthly with the shared dream of seeing God throw open the floodgates of heaven so that every child, parent, and worker in foster care feels seen, understood, and cared for. To join Team 310 or learn more, head over to theforgotteninitiative.org/team310. That's theforgotteninitiative.org/team310. And remember, if you are someone passionate about supporting the foster care community, starting next month, applications to become a TFI Advocate will be open. This opportunity only comes around twice a year, and there are limited spots available. So if you are interested in supporting your local foster care agencies and raising awareness of foster care within churches, then this is the perfect chance for you to get involved. The best part is that it is completely free, and our team will be there to assist you throughout the entire process. You can learn more and sign up to be notified when applications go live at tfiadvocate.org. All right, my friend, thank you for listening. I look forward to being back in this space together very soon.